皆さんこんにちは、ケビ先生です。So this should be lesson 4 of the Kids Explore Japan online course, and this is going to be a review of the verbs that we've previously learned and just practicing with those verb structures again, and also talking about structures and knowing how to use them, the different structures. So, okay, without further ado, 始めましょう. As always, we're going to start with a review from the previous lesson. And if you recall, last lesson we talked about the phrases ga arimasu and ga imasu, both of which mean there is blank or I have blank. So the main difference between arimasu and imasu being that arimasu is used for all kinds of non-living things, whereas imasu is used for living things like people and animals. So if I have this sentence, we have chocoreto ga ka. So based on the information that I just gave, do we use arimasu or imasu? Arimasu, because chocolate is not alive. So the question, chocoreto ga arimasu ka? It could either be hai arimasu or iie arimasen if you don't have it. So this one is onesan ga ka. So which one are we going to use, arimasu or imasu? We would be using imasu because a sister is a living thing, obviously. So onesan ga imasu ka? Hai, onesan ga imasu for me. Or you could say iie onesan ga imasen if you do not have one. So what would this one be? Neko ga imasu ka? Neko ga imasu ka? So if you have a cat, that'd be hai, neko ga imasu. If you don't have a cat, it would be iie, neko ga imasen. What about this? That would be tie-dye no T-shirts ga arimasu ka? Tie-dye no T-shirts ga arimasu ka? Hai, arimasu, or iie, arimasen. So when we're talking about where an object is located using arimasu, we have this kind of a form. Place no postposition ni object ga arimasu. So before, for example, when we said chocoreto ga arimasu, there is chocolate, or I have chocolate. The chocolate is the object we're talking about. We're asking, is there chocolate? Is there chocolate? Yes, on the table there is chocolate. So that would be the object. So whatever we're looking for is the object. The other place is where we're talking about where it's related to. It is on the table. It is under the bed. It is next to the lamp. So that's the other place we're talking about. So in a picture like this where we have the table and the phone and we're looking for the phone, we'd say teiburu no someplace ni denwa ga arimasu. If we cover just the first part of the sentence, we can still say denwa ga arimasu. There is a phone. Where is the phone? Teiburu no someplace ni denwa ga arimasu. So what would example 1 be? Teiburu no shita ni denwa ga arimasu. We had someone also offer hidari, and yes, it is under the table to the left. So you could also suggest that it's teiburu no hidari ni denwa ga arimasu. What about number 2? That would be teiburu no ue ni denwa ga arimasu. Teiburu no ue ni denwa ga arimasu. And for number 3, that would be teiburu no mae ni denwa ga arimasu. Mae means in front. So this is why it's really important to know your vocabulary, or else you won't be able to answer these kinds of questions. So let's see if we can find these 8 things in town. 図書館、レストラン、川、学校、森、オフィス、ホテル、バスケのコート. So these were all labeled on the previous picture we did in the last lesson, but so hopefully you still can remember where these are, as they're on the vocabulary list. So you can talk about where any of these 8 places are in the picture in relation to something else. So I'll do a few examples, and then you can do some examples on your own, either using the same places, just describing them differently, or the other places that I don't mention. So let's start with the library. The library is in front of the office, so that's what I'm going to say. So we do the different order from English, so we're going to start with office. We say, オフィスの前に図書館があります. So in English I'd say, in front of the office, there is a library. オフィスの前に図書館があります. So let us look at the river. The river is to the left of the park. So in Japanese, we have to start with the part that's left of the park. So we say, 公園の左に川があります. 公園の左に川があります. So to the left of the park, there is a river. I will do one more. I will do the restaurant. The restaurant is under the bridge. So like always, we're going to start with the part that's under the bridge and then say restaurant. So, 橋の下にレストランがあります. 橋の下にレストランがあります. Under the bridge, there is a restaurant. So you can either use the same locations and just describe them differently, or you can use the other locations I did not talk about and see how many different ways you can describe where they're located using the place no postposition ni blank ga arimasu form. So today, this is mostly review and practice from when we worked with verbs, so we are going to be doing more with verbs, as this clearly states. So let's just kind of review what we know about verbs. What is a verb? A verb is an action word. So anything that you can do, whether it's run, jump, sing, dance, watch, eat, drink, even really non-action-y ones like breathe or live or grow. These are all verbs. As long as it's something that you can do, it is a verb. And just think about in English, you can't say very much without using verbs. So almost every sentence that you're going to say is going to have a verb in it, pretty much. So in fact, in English, every sentence actually has a verb. So this is why it's really important, or else you can't really, your communication is kind of halted if you don't learn how to use your verbs properly. So that's why this is so important. So we learned 3 different types of verbs in Japanese. What were they? They were the ru verbs, the u verbs, and the irregular verbs. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Do we remember how to conjugate ru verbs? Yeah, so we're going to look at that. Do we remember how to conjugate u verbs? So let's just start with the ru verbs for review. First, you have to drop the ru at the end of the verb in its dictionary form, and then add mas. So let's look at these verbs. I hope that everyone knows the verbs. They are eventually listed here, but I want you to try to say it before I put the word up. So this is okiru, to wake up. So how would you conjugate it? drop the ru, so it would be oki, add mas, okimasu. So what verb would this be in Japanese? This is neru. So if we conjugate it, we drop the ru and it becomes ne, add mas, it's nemasu. What about this? They are watching a movie. This would be miru. So dropping ru and adding mas, miru becomes mimasu. So for this verb, this is taberu. Taberu, drop the ru, add mas, becomes tabemasu. And finally, we have this one, which we didn't work with as much, but it's wasureru, to forget. So in its full form, it'd be wasuremasu. So if I gave you some new ru verbs, would you be able to conjugate them using those rules that we talked about? So this teacher is teaching. Teaching in Japanese is oshieru. So how would we make this in its full polite form? That would be oshiemasu. Oshiemasu. And this is a more useful verb in Japanese than in English because they use it a lot instead of tell. So like in English you would say, can you tell me where is the store? But in Japanese they'd say, can you teach me where is the store? Or can you tell me your name? They'd say, can you teach me your name? So this is actually a kind of useful verb in Japanese. One more would be to start. Hajimeru. So how would we do this one? Drop the ru, add mas, that becomes hajimemasu. Hajimemasu. So let's look at u verbs as well. U verbs conjugate differently. All u verbs end in the sound u, whether it's the actual character for u or something else like ku or gu, mu, nu, bu. So what you do is you raise that u sound to an e. So for example, if it's ku, it becomes ki. If it's mu, it becomes mi. If it's bu, it becomes bi. Then you add the mas. So what verb was this in Japanese? This verb was iku. So if we change it to an e and then add mas, that would be ikimasu. Ikimasu. What is this verb? This one is nomu. So changing it to an e, then adding mas would become nomimasu. This verb is kiku. So changing that to an e, kikimasu. This picture would be yomu, to read. So raising the mu to a mi, then adding mas, becomes yomimasu. Here we have Pikachu and he's speaking, he's saying pika pika. So this one was the tricky one. In Japanese, they don't have the sound C. So when we raise hanasu to an E sound, it becomes hanashimasu. Hanashimasu. Finally, this verb to buy is kau. So this one's simple. Change u to i, kai, then add mas, kaimasu. If I told you some new u verbs, could you use the former rule in order to conjugate them? So this person is writing, and writing in Japanese is kaku. So before we learned kiku, meaning to listen, but this one is kaku. So how do we change kaku to its full polite form? That would be kakimasu. Kakimasu. In this one, the children are going home. So in Japanese, they actually have a specific verb that means to go home. And that would be kaeru. So even though this ends with a ru sound, this is an u verb. So we have to conjugate it by raising the u to an e, then adding mas, which would make it kaerimasu. Kaerimasu. Which is why it's important to memorize which verbs are u verbs and ru verbs, because sometimes it's not always obvious. So we also talked about irregular verbs, and these ones are simple in that they don't follow rule and that you have to memorize them, but that also makes them, trickier. So we talked about two main ones. The first one being kuru, which means to come, and in Japanese, kuru becomes kimasu. Kimasu. And the other verb that we talked about, suru, the general to do verb, becomes shimasu. Shimasu. So when there's other verbs that are related, like benkyou suru, that also becomes benkyou shimasu. So if I tell you two new irregular verbs, can you conjugate them knowing this fact? This girl is cooking. In Japanese, cooking is ryori suru. So how would we conjugate that? That would be ryori shimasu. We also have this boy who is exercising here, and exercise in Japanese is undo suru. So how would we conjugate that? That would be undo shimasu. So as you can see, it stays the same, and suru just becomes shimasu. So let's talk about how to use verbs in sentences. So when I say there is no object in the sentence, I literally mean that you only have whatever you're talking about and the verb. So there's no other thing in the sentence. You can't say, I sleep a book, right? That's not something that you can say. So there's no other there's no other object in that sentence. So these are all sentences where there's no other object. So first we have this man, and he says, Watashi wa kaerimasu. Watashi wa kaerimasu. This means, I go home. Watashi wa kaerimasu. Now we have a teacher, and he's speaking, and he says, Kurasu wa hajimemasu yo. Kurasu wa hajimemasu yo. So class will begin. Class begins. In Japanese, just the regular verb can mean begins, or it can mean will begin. That's true for all of them. So it's either just general, like it does this, or it will do this. So we have this person here at the bottom, and he's clearly impatient and waiting, so he asks, Tomodachi wa kimasu ka? Tomodachi wa kimasu ka? So, are my friends coming? Will my friends come? He's clearly waiting for his friends to arrive, so he says, will my friends come? So that is just subject wa, verb. Now, if we're using a verb in a sentence where there is an object, so it's subject wa something o, verb, it would go something like this. We see this bird here, and he's watching Kitty-chan, who's writing a love letter, and he says, Kitty-chan wa rabureta o kakimasu ne. Kitty-chan wa rabureta o kakimasu ne. Hello Kitty writes a love letter. In Japanese, there's of course a word for love and of course a word for letter, which is on the vocabulary list, but in Japanese they take, for the concept of love letter, they just take the English word and they just change it to Japanese pronunciation, so that's rabureta. So we still have that subject wa, something o, verb that we've talked about in the past. Let's look at another example. We have Keruro here, and he is watching an anime show on TV, so he's going to say, Boku ga anime o mimasu. Boku wa anime o mimasu. I watch anime. Boku, if you recall from our previous lessons with Hashimoto Sensei, is another word for I, which is usually used by boys. So finally at the bottom we have Naruto, and he's eating ramen because he loves ramen. So he's going to tell us, 店長はラーメンを料理します. Tencho is like the shop owner, so in Naruto's world, this is the shop owner who owns the ramen shop. So he's saying the shop owner cooks ramen. Tencho wa ramen o ryori shimasu. So this was a very similar activity to what we've done before, and let's just look at this first example. We have a girl and she's opening the window to a blue sky and she's stretching, saying Ohio. So based on that picture, we gather she's waking up. So the question that's always going to start off is going to be incorrect. So the question here says, 今女の人は寝ますか? So we know that she's not sleeping. Neru is to sleep, which is a vocabulary word. So we know she's not sleeping, so we're going to answer いいえ、女の人は寝ません. So as you can see, this is just simply repetition. The first sentence had 女の人は寝ます, and we're just saying the same thing but changing it to negative. 女の人は寝ません. But we do want to explain what she is doing. We want to say she's waking up. 今起きます. Now she's waking up. So let us do the next several examples, but there will be no answer given. So that will be up to you to create your own answer. So we have this picture, and the question is, 子供は靴を買いますか? 子供は靴を買いますか? So we know that they're not buying kutsu, because kutsu are shoes, so we have to just say いいえ、子供は靴を買いません. So the question is very similar to the answer. The only difference is we're just changing it to negative. But what are they buying? アイスクリームを買います. Buying ice cream. The next example, あの人は手紙を書きますか? あの人は手紙を書きますか? So a sample answer would be いいえ、あの人は手紙を書きません. 本を書きます. Let's look at this next example. 女の人は帰りますか? 女の人は帰りますか? This one's a little bit different than the previous two. So your answer is still the same. You still just repeat it, but in negative. いいえ、女の人は帰りません. But she's not going home. She's going to a restaurant. And so we actually have to use the verb going. And we have to use the correct form. So we say 女の人はレストランに行きます. Remember that if you're using a movement verb, like kuru or iku, you use ni instead of o. 女の人はレストランに行きます. Last one, 男の子はいちごを食べますか? 男の子はいちごを食べますか? So sample answer could be いいえ、男の子はいちごを食べません. ピザを食べます. So next we have a video called Usagi no Nichijou, which means Rabbit's everyday or Rabbit's everyday life. And we're going to watch Rabbit's explanation about what happens to her in her daily life, and she's going to use a variety of verbs. So please pay attention, and I'll ask some questions afterward.
私は7時に起きます。 私はよくシリアルを食べます。でも、時々パンケーキを食べます。私はオレンジジュースが嫌いです。だから全然オレンジジュースを飲みません。その後、弟と学校に行きます。学校で先生は日本語を教えます。4時に私たちは私の家に帰ります。大抵宿題があります。私の部屋で宿題をします。晩ご飯の前に時々テレビゲームをします。最後に私のベッドで寝ます。
So I encourage you to watch the video again if you can, because everything should be understandable with the vocabulary words that you already know, and try to describe in your own words what Rabbit does during the day, even if it's just a few things. So like Rabbit, if you can, try to plan maybe 4 sentences to describe your everyday. Whether it's something that you do, something you don't do, if you have homework, if you do homework, if you like eating something or you don't, just like Rabbit. So give this video a pause and try to make some sentences of your own. So next I want to really stress the grammar aspect of Japanese, and grammar is important. Let me click this button again. Grammar is important. I can't emphasize this enough. So Japanese, just like any other language, has different grammar rules, and it's really important that we learn them, because you could be saying something completely different if you use the wrong grammar. So we're going to talk about all the grammar points that we know so far. We know X, wa, Y, des. I like to use X's and Y's so that way you can just plug in your own words. But so this form, X, wa, Y, des, means X is Y. Whether that is, I am Gebi Sensei. The apple is red. That is a cat. I am tall. Whatever it is X is Y. So the example that we're going to just stick with is Watashi wa Gebi Sensei desu. I am Gebi Sensei. We also know X wa Y ga suki or kirai desu. So X wa Y ga suki desu. We recall that means X likes Y. A lot of times you end up talking about yourself because you know your likes and dislikes. So you like, I like apples. The girl likes apples. It doesn't have to be about a person. It can be the horse likes apples, or you could say the squirrel doesn't like apples. So you can plug whatever you want in for these different pieces, but it still means X likes Y, or X doesn't like Y. And so the example I'm going to stick with for this would be Watashi wa ringo ga suki desu. I like apples. Watashi wa ringo ga suki desu. The recent form that we've talked about was X wa Y ga arimasu. So the verb aru arimasu means to exist, which is why it's kind of hard to translate it, and I've often given it 2 translations, meaning there is or I have or something like that, because it's kind of hard to translate it. So when you have X wa y ga arimasu, you can think of it as X has Y. But if there's no X wa there, then it's more like Y exists. So the way that we can remember this is watashi wa ringo ga arimasu. I have an apple. But this doesn't just have to be something that I have. This can be something, you could plug anything you want into X and Y. You can say the town has a library, the girl has a toy, the class has a test. So you can plug in whatever you need to for X and Y. So although arimasu is a verb, we do use ga with it instead of o. It's just not possible to use o with arimasu or imasu for that matter. So that's just something you have to memorize, and this is just the way the phrase goes. But speaking of verbs, what we talked about with verbs are x, wa, verb. So x, wa, verb just means x verbs, whatever that verb is. Like X sings, X eats, X sleeps, X grows, X lives. So whatever the verb is. And there is no object in this sentence. So you only have your subject and your verb. It's just that simple. So an example would be watashi wa tabemasu. I eat, and this can also mean I will eat, because this form of the verb either just means habitual action or future, so like I will eat. But if we want to have another object in the sentence, like you want to say I eat something, I eat an apple, I eat cake, I eat ice cream, X, wa, Y, O, verb. So an example is watashi wa ringo o tabemasu. You can see the structure is basically the same as the one before it. The only difference is now we squished another object in there and a marker after it. So this can be anything. You can say the man sings a song, or the dog chases the cat. You can have anything as long as there's something you can plug in for X, something you can plug in for Y, and then the verb. This is the structure that we tried to really drill home for a while now, and I'm still seeing a lot of difficulty with it. It's really important that we understand when to use what forms. So let me ask this question. What do all of these have in common? Looking back at all of them, you'll notice that they all start with X, wa. And that is going to usually, almost always, be the case. You always start with something wa. Yeah, you almost always start with something wa. On the few occasions that we haven't, that's usually because the subject, whatever you're talking about, is fairly obvious. So if I were just talking about myself all the time and I'm just listing off a bunch of things like watashi wa tabemasu, watashi wa yomimasu, watashi wa nomimasu, watashi wa ikimasu, and it's very obvious I'm talking about myself, I don't have to keep saying watashi wa. So I have been using it very often, the subject wa in these sentences, to make it easier to understand, and I think for the time being, until you're used to it, it's best to keep saying the X wa. But another thing that all of these sentences have is if they have another part of the sentence. So if it's like an X wa Y, there's always some kind of a particle after it. I know we haven't really gone too much into depth what the particles do, but I have talked about them. Those are the particles like wa, and ga and o and ni and de. I have kept them in bold so that way you can see them, and they're the parts of the sentence that don't change. You can see, like in this example, we have X can change, Y can change, and the verb can change, but the wa and the o are always there. And this is so important. So many people either mix them up or just don't say them at all. But they are important, and doing the wrong one can mean something completely different. For example, here's something I talked about in class. If I say, watashi wa Zoe ni kakimasu, that means I write to Zoe. So I'm like writing a letter to Zoe. I write to Zoe. If I say, watashi wa Zoe o kakimasu, now that means I am writing the word Zoe. Like have a piece of paper and I'm writing Z-O-E over and over again. I write the word Zoe. If I say, watashi wa Zoe to kakimasu, now that means that Zoe and I are both writing. And if we said something like, watashi wa Zoe de kakimasu, that means that I picked up Zoe and I'm trying to use her as a pencil and I'm trying to write with her. So even though I just changed one single particle each time, it means something vastly different. And you can't even say, watashi wa Zoe ga kakimasu. A Japanese person wouldn't understand that. I mean, perhaps they might if they're used to the mistakes a foreigner would make, but in my experience, Japanese people take things very literally, and if they're not used to speaking with foreigners who make mistakes, they might not understand what that even is supposed to be. So I know that this is difficult because it's not something we have in English. But when you memorize something new, when you're learning something new, I think it might help to just memorize it as a form like this. So that way, whenever you need to, you just plug in the words that you need. So we're going to try that with an activity and see if we can just plug in the different words that we need. So we're going to be making sentences by asking what, which, and how. Let's elaborate on that a little bit. What is it in English that we're trying to say? You have to know in English. A lot of times I'll ask people, like, what do you want to say? And they'll just start going off in Japanese, but I want to know, what in English do you want to say? Do you want to say something has something? Do you want to say something likes something? Or something does a verb? You have to know beforehand. And once you know, then we have to decide which sentence form do we use. Do we use X wa ga arimasu? Do we use X wa y des? Or X wa y o verb? Once we know that, then we just have to ask, how do we fill in each of the blanks for that form? So I have several pictures here, and they each can be thought of in different ways, and I'm going to try and show you how we're going to use this thought process. So all of these pictures will be of Hello Kitty, and in this first picture, Hello Kitty has the body of a robot. So what I want to say is, I want to say Hello Kitty is a robot. So we know that that form is X, wa, y, des. So how do we fill it in? Kitty-chan wa roboto desu. Kitty-chan wa roboto desu. There aren't really any other sentence examples that I can think of for that one, but the next one's going to be more versatile. So look at this picture. Kitty has a cake. So we can say a lot of different things about this. We can say, Hello Kitty makes a cake. Hello Kitty likes cake. Hello Kitty has a cake. Hello Kitty cooks. But I think because there's an object in this picture, I think I'm going to say that Hello Kitty cooks a cake. So we know that we have a verb because we're talking about cook, and we have an object. We want to talk about cake. So which sentence form do we use? We have to use X, Y, Y, O verb. So to fill that in, I'm just going to take the words I know and plug it in. Kitty-chan wa keiki o ryori shimasu. But you can do one of those other sentences as well. In this example, we have Hello Kitty drinking some juice. Since I just used one with a verb, I want to do something different. Instead, I'm going to say Hello Kitty likes orange juice. That's what I want to say for this one. So, I've decided what I want to say, and the sentence form I'd use to say Kitty likes it would be X, wa, Y, ga, suki desu. So now to fill in the blanks for that would be Kitty-chan wa orange juice ga suki desu. For the next picture, Hello Kitty's just sleeping there. So that's what I want to say. I want to say Hello Kitty sleeps. That's what I've decided. So since this is a sentence with just one verb and there's no other object with it, we're just going to have to use the X, wa verb form. So to fill in the blanks, that would be Kitty-chan wa nemasu. So finally, for this picture, we could say lots of things. We could say Kitty takes pictures, or Kitty likes cameras, or Kitty has a camera, or Kitty is a cameraman, or something like that. But I think I want to say Kitty has a camera. So I've decided what I want to say, and the sentence form for Kitty has a camera would be X, wa, Y, ga, arimasu. So to fill in the blanks, that would be Kitty-chan wa kamera ga arimasu. So if you want to go ahead and try to make different sentences, go ahead. I know that this is a long process to come up with a sentence, but I think it's a good tool for if you're confused and you are just sitting there not knowing where to start. Where to start is you just have to figure out what you want to say, and do you know how you would say that? And that's why I like to give the forms with X's and Y's instead of just blanks, or instead of answers already filled in, because this way it gives you like a template that you can just plug in whatever you want to say, and you have a lovely just fill in the blank form for you to use. So let's use what we know and try another activity. Here we have 4 different kinds of monsters. And they are completely made up, of course, but we're going to try and describe who they are and what they like and dislike, what they do and don't do, and what do they have either in their bag or behind them or under them or in their stomach, using the phrases and the forms that we've talked about. So you might have to stop and think and ask yourself the questions, but we should be able to work through it and make several coherent sentences. And I will do the first example. So this is the first monster, Akadama, and I will introduce him in Japanese. これは赤玉です。赤玉はリンゴとトマトが好きです。でもバナナが嫌いです。赤玉はよく運動します。でもあんまり本を読みません。赤玉はカバンの中にボールがあります。So, I was able to use all of the different structures we've learned to describe akadama. So, hopefully you were able to follow my description. So, try it on your own with some of these other monsters. We have Rokuja, who has something underneath him. So remember underneath or below. We have Dorojo, who has something mysterious behind her. So remember behind. And then we have Shizuno, who has something in his stomach that's making a sound. So try to describe these monsters, and next time in class I'll ask somebody if they can give me an example of what they came up with for their monster. Finally, we're going to talk about Nihon no bunka, Japanese culture, and today's lesson we're talking about Shinwa, mythology, and yokai, or monsters. As we can see, we just have a couple pictures to introduce the topic. On the left, we have some people riding a dragon. Dragons are very popular within East Asian culture mythology as well as European mythology, although they're very different styles of dragon. And the Japanese or the Chinese and the Korean dragon, they're more snake-like rather than a big, like a winged flying dragon that we think of in European culture. That's a Japanese dragon. On the right, we have Daiden, which is the god demon of thunder and lightning, and he strikes his taiko drums, like we learned taiko last time. He strikes his taiko drums to make thunder and lightning. In the center here, we have a fox, and it has 9 tails, because we're going to be talking about that mythology. So, Japan's original religion is called Shinto. And in Shintoism, every single thing in the world has a god or a spirit with it, whether it's inanimate objects like rocks or trees or houses, anything like that, rivers, the sky, but even more modern day things, like people will still talk about the computer kami or the technology kami or the kami for tests if you're trying to pray to get a good grade on a test. And Japanese mythology isn't filled with just gods, but there are also many other mythological creatures, like the ogres and the monsters, as well as other creatures that are real, but there is a mythology that they have special powers. So here are some of the things we're going to talk about. Like, we're going to talk about cranes and their mysterious power. And on the top right here, we have a messenger fox who sends messages to the Inari shrine goddess. And at the bottom, we have the monsters. We have like an ogre, and we have a haunted umbrella in the middle. And then here on the right, we have a ghost, a Japanese-style ghost. So first we're going to talk about real animals that are said to have mythological powers. This is the kitsune, or fox. And in Japanese mythology, when they reach 100 years old, they're said to have 9 tails, and they're super powerful, and they can do magic. And one thing that they like to do is they like to transform and disguise themselves as beautiful women, and sometimes they'll cause tricks. And so foxes are often seen as tricksters, and people are kind of wary of foxes, and sometimes there'll be morals and stories as like, don't trust a beautiful woman walking alone in the dark because she might actually be a fox in disguise and be out to trick you. We also have the tanuki, which was the animal we talked about before, the Japanese raccoon dog, and they're also said that if they put a leaf on their head, they can transform as well. And sometimes they could transform into a beautiful woman, but they're often seen as old men, and they also like to play tricks on people. But instead of playing tricks to like lure people in and to make them love them, they play tricks to make people look foolish or to just make a fool out of somebody. And so they're often seen as old men traveling, which is why they have like the hat and the walking staff in most of their images. We're also going to talk about the Japanese crane, or tsuru, and there is a legend according to the crane that when you do a crane a favor, it will do something great back for you. So there is a legend where a man helps a crane from a trap and it flies away, and eventually he goes home and a beautiful woman arrives at his door and asks to stay with him, and they fall in love and become married, and she offers to weave some cloth to make them money. And the cloth that she weaves is the most beautiful cloth ever, and it receives much money. But the woman won't let her husband see how she makes it. She always hides behind a curtain. And the man is just so curious because she's making this amazing fabric. So he peeks behind the curtain and he sees that it was actually a crane who had transformed into a beautiful woman. And the crane explains that she was the crane that he saved, and she was returning the favor, but she was using her own feathers. She was plucking her own feathers to make beautiful cloth for him. But since he discovered her secret, she had to leave. So that is the legend. And paper cranes are also said to bring back health when someone's sick. So sometimes you will see whenever there's been a problem or someone's sick, people will make 1,000 paper cranes. When Japan had a very horrible earthquake and tsunami back in 2011, there were many efforts to donate money and make cranes. And I know obviously paper cranes doesn't help them in that kind of a situation, but according to mythology, it does. So next we're going to talk briefly about the jinja. So this is a Japanese shrine. It looks very similar to something else we've talked about, but it's not quite the same. Earlier we learned about otera, which means temple, and the difference between them is that a temple is for Buddhism, which is a different religion than Shintoism. And Japanese people are pretty free with their religious practices, so many people will go to both. I saw many temples in Japan, but probably I think there were more shrines because they can be much smaller, whereas temples usually take up more space, and there's more often a building that you can enter. Like this is one on the right. This is a very famous one in Nara Prefecture. So the jinja, the shrine, is for worshipping Shintoism, the religion that's native to Japan. And Shintoism has many gods and goddesses. So the higher up important gods who will control the very major things like the sky and the storms, the sea, they usually take the form of people. But there's no specific story necessarily that tells you what every god looks like or every spirit. So a lot of people take artistic licenses when depicting them. So for example, in the Studio Ghibli film Spirited Away, the river spirit is depicted as a dragon. And in another Studio Ghibli film, Princess Mononoke, the spirit of the forest is like this hybrid animal with like a monkey face and a goat beard and the body of like a kirin, which is a mythical creature from China. But they also can be just like whatever, like in Spirited Away, here's some kind of spirit, some kind of kami, and it's just kind of a blob, and what is it? So there's no specific depiction for every single kind of spirit there is. But we'll also talk about some of the yokai, the monsters. So we have this famous one called a kappa, and a kappa is kind of like a turtle boy with like a duck face. And he often plays tricks on people and sometimes like pull them into water or get them wet because he lives in the river. And here's the tengu. Tengu is kind of like a cross between a crow and a person, and he's said to be a martial arts master and prevents war from starting and is often considered more of a good yokai, a good monster, a good spirit. There's also kind of really silly ones, like we saw the haunted umbrella before. So we have here is just like a crazy invisible demon wall who will block people's paths, and you can't get around him unless you tickle his stomach or tickle by his feet, then he'll disappear so you can go through. So as you can see, like a lot of yokai, while they're probably not real, they are used to explain a lot of normal phenomenon, like, oh, I got pulled into the river suddenly, that's very strange, a kappa must have done it. Oh, I got lost, it felt like something was blocking my way, so the nurikabe must have done it. But there's also just some other mythological creatures that kind of exist throughout many different cultures. So this was one that's maybe not as famous, but I think it's really interesting. This one's called the nube, and it's basically the Japanese version of a chimera, which is an animal hybrid. So it has the face of a monkey, the body of a tanuki, the legs of a tiger, and the tail of a snake. So yeah, so there are tons of different yokai or monsters in Japanese culture. But if I just go to the Wikipedia page for a list of legendary creatures from Japan, or if I just type in yokai, you can see that there's a huge list of Japanese creatures in folklore. And some of them are scary, like the nube, like a malicious spirit, or a mermaid yokai. But some of them are very randomly specific and very strange. Like here, the akamanto is a malicious spirit who haunts bathrooms and asks the cubicle occupants if they want red or blue paper. Kind of weird and kind of random. Or just really weird, like when you leave an old umbrella and it becomes a demon umbrella. So, like here, a luminescent heron. A spirit that washes azuki beans. So sometimes they're just really strange and random. So go ahead and go on Wikipedia and look up some of these. They're actually quite fascinating, and it's easy to tell that some of them were created in order to give an explanation to something strange and unexplainable, but some of them are just very strange. Since we were talking about spirits, I also thought that I would show you the trailer for the Studio Ghibli film Spirited Away, which is dubbed into English by the Disney company. So this is originally a Japanese film created by a very well-known Japanese studio, Studio Ghibli. So enjoy this trailer.
Walt Disney Studios presents a Studio Ghibli film.
Honey, don't take a shortcut. You always get us lost.
From master filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki.
What is it?
Come on, let's go in. I want to see what's on the other side.
Where are you going? Hey! You said just a quick look! Now let's go back!
Shh, be here. Get out of here, now!
What?
Leave before it gets dark. You've got to get across the river. Go! I'll distract them.
I'm dreaming! Ah! Come on, wake up! I'm see-through!
Don't be afraid. I'm Master Haku.
No!
I just want to help you.
No!
In worlds seen and unseen, where spirits are transformed presents a Studio Ghibli film. Experience a magical movie phenomenon embraced by all the world.
Let's go!
This fall, prepare to be spirited away.
So this was an award-winning animated film, and you can see the artist Hayao Miyazaki's rendition of different kinds of spirits. Some looked like dragons, some monsters looked like spiders, which are also considered kind of mythological in Japanese. So I really recommend this film. It's a great movie, and you can see different kinds of spirits from Japanese mythology and different kinds of yokai. I also originally wanted to show a video about various yokai, and this one was created by the Japan Society of New York City. So I won't show their video, but I will send you a link to it, and I really recommend watching it because it gives more of an explanation about some of the more well-known yokai in Japanese mythology. And finally, 今日の J-POP は Flow no Remember です。So Flow is a 5-member Japanese rock band, and they've been around for quite a number of years, and they're really popular. So I thought I'd show some of their songs because they're really fun. And I won't show it here as usual, but I will send out the link along with this video. So please watch it. I hope you've been enjoying them. I know we haven't had a chance to watch them in class, but I hope you watch them on your own so you can get some exposure to Japanese pop music.
Okay, so that was the review. So I hope things are a little bit clearer now that we've had lots of practice. If you're still a little bit confused, feel free to ask me any questions or go back and look at the video again and do whatever you need to make sure that we've got this. Because as you can probably tell, knowing verbs is really important to being able to speak in Japanese. To make sure that everyone's been watching the video, I have a little task for you. On the lesson 4 quiz, I'm going to add a question that just says bonus question or something like that. And what I want you to do is I want you to go to the Wikipedia page about the yokai and look for one yokai that sounds really interesting, and on the quiz in the bonus question space I just want you to type the name of that yokai that you looked up. Okay, so that's just for me to see like who's been watching the video and knew that bonus question. Okay, so I appreciate that, so thank you, and don't forget to look at the material for next week. There shouldn't be too much vocabulary, but you know, if you want to have a heads up, which you really should, make sure that you read those over, read the grammar points, and if you need to, print it out and just have it on hand for next lesson. Okay, so また来週ね。バイバイ。